A recent data from Gencos show that average Nigeria's unutilized power generation has increased year on year to over 3,000 megawatts in 2021 from over 1,000 megawatts in 2013, before rising consistently to over 2,000 and over 2,000 and 3,000 rather megawatts in 2016 and 2017 respectively. This is indication of an increase of 291% in the past 8 years, due mainly to lack of infrastructure. Now, the report revealed that adequate investment has not been made over the years to transmit and distribute electricity to consumers, including households and companies, after 8 years of privatization. This has denied the nation of substantial power which could have been utilized to boost economic and other activities in other sectors worldwide. It has also constrained Gencos from generating revenue from their unutilized power over the years, especially as data noted that although available generation capacity exceeds 5,000 megawatts, it has not resulted in 100% invoice settlement. Now, to give us perspectives on the issue of power, we have in the studio the founder and executive partner, Lofty Inc., Michael Olugbemi, here in the studio with us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's talk about this issue of power. I mean, it's an old conversation that we've always had. And we want to see it from the different perspectives. Data is showing us that there has been an increase. But as an expert, would you say that the increase is commensurable to what is expected by now in 2021 from the time that this privatization took place?
Yeah, thank you again for having me, and good morning to your audience. The power journey for Nigeria, I would say it's been in different phases. I mean, the attempt at privatization was after the successful privatization of the telecom sector. And the thinking around that was that once you privatize, then everything was going to be fine. I mean, you just needed to privatize, and money will rush in, and everything will be huru. The way we used to have Nitel, issues with Nitel, and then it was government controlled, and we simply just sold some licenses, and investment came into the telecom sectors. The same thing will happen in the power sector.
Today, well, everyone has phones today.
Yes, everyone has phones now, but everyone cannot have their own power generation station in the first place. So it's a very different sector, very, very different.
Yeah, but at least options.
Yeah,
people should have more options, isn't it?
People should have more.
Isn't it the idea?
Yeah, the idea was, I think, even the basic idea was more investment into the sector. Government alone could not bear the burden of providing power to the citizens. So you wanted to encourage private sector investment into the sector. So you had two parts. You had a part of either privatizing for the purpose of just pure investment, and you have the other part of privatizing for increasing power access. So Nigeria decided to do one, you know, when they say you're neither warm nor cold. So we try to, you know, walk the fine line. And then oftentimes, if you look at the Potter forces in a rule or the Potter law in management, you end up getting the worst outcome. And that's exactly what happened. In our privatization strategy, we're not very clear. What were we trying to encourage? Were we trying to encourage more investment into the sector, or were we trying to just purely encourage more power access to the general citizens? What do I mean by power access? How many people actually have meters connected to them and, you know, lines that get to them? We wanted to have it in both ways. And oftentimes, as a strategy, it never works. You have to choose one. You have to decide, do I just want more investment? Then that way, what you do is to maximize the potential return to investors, and investors will rush in. Do I just want to provide power access? Then all you need to do is to provide access, generally speaking, and maybe you're going to prioritize renewable energy and some other strategy. But we never were very clear. We're wishy-washy in the privatization. And that's what you've seen in the outcome. The outcome have been suboptimal in the last 8 years. Now, what has gone on in the last 2 to 3 years, actually, is to be commended. I mean, from a perspective of an industry practitioner, is that finally we're trying to now focus on what really matters, in the sense of what do you need to do to make the power sector work. We've been saying this for the past 5 years prior, when the privatization process was bungled, in my opinion. Because, for example, let's take that privatization process, for example. What we did was we unbundled the disco sector. We did the same thing with the Gencos sector, and then we disaggregated them. The guy producing the power could not see from where, after he produces the power, where he's going to get the money from, right? So we went with the Indian model. Whereas there are various other options we could do, where we could do vertical integrated privatization, such that the guy producing at a co-disco, within a co-disco, is also the one selling within a co-disco. So that way you can hold his feet to the fire and say, look, you are a co-disco, provide me more power. You have more citizens that are here, provide me more power. But you can't do that under the second circumstance, because the Gencos produce power, send it to TCN, and they pray that TCN send it to some Genco, and then at the end of the day, there's another body called Embeds that is supposed to now distribute the money to everybody. So it's so disorganized.
So do you think that this creates some kind of bottlenecks
yeah,
in the whole process?
Yeah, not only the bottlenecks, it creates some moral, what would I call it, some ethical, it even throws up some basic investment questions, right? Because if I'm investing in the Genco, I want to see how my money comes back. So to an investor, you're looking, if I invest in a Genco, I don't own the disco, neither do I own the market settlements mechanism. So why should I put my money into the sector? That's what you saw in the last 5 to 6 years prior. Why there was no investment. Now, what had been done in the last 1 year, CBN stepped in with the NERC regulator, and they created what they call the settlement system, where all discos money that they are collecting had to be domiciled in a DMB. And then from the DMB, CBN, as the regulator of the DMB, basically decides, based on what the disco and the NERC have proposed, what goes first to all the people that had contributed to the electricity being produced in the first place. The Gencos, the TCN guys, the Embeds, they first get settled. And then whatever is left, they send it now to the discos to use. It didn't used to be the case. So what happened before was that discos who were sitting at the last tail end, who were not the ones that invested in gas, they were not the ones that invested in transmission, they were not the ones that invested in generation, basically got the money first, and they collected most of it and told the rest of the sector to take care of themselves. So what you had with this new rule that was introduced late last year, and that was started to be implemented, I think from December last year to early this year, was that no, you can't do that. The discos had to collect the money, it has to be resident in the bank. And the banks now decided, based on CBN and NEC coordination, who got the money based on a predetermined formula that they've already agreed. And so what did we see? We saw that liquidity went up. Over quarter on quarter, liquidity went up from 34%, even quarter on quarter, from 124 billion to 184 billion, and then it went to 234 billion, which is what we've been saying. So basically, we had actors, bad actors in the system before, that were basically cheating the system. And without the discos remitting the amount of money that's supposed to go to the Genco, what we have is that basically actors stay out of the Gencos. Nobody invests in generation. Nobody invests in transmission. So what you now had is that got corrected, and almost immediately we saw Tony Elumelu pick up the FM5 station and paid 400 billion for it, because it now makes sense. If I'm going to buy a Genco asset, I want to see how my money is going to come back to me. And you can't have discos now constitute themselves to the ones that are always running away with the money, we're not seeing the money. So that was one. Another thing that happened was there was this service-based tariff system that was introduced. So you had power for 8 hours minimum in a day. You got a certain tariff band. If you got power for between 8 to 12 hours, you got another tariff band. So that's graduated all the way to top-tier customers that got power from, say, 20 to 24 hours a day. You paid more. So the more you paid, the more power you get, basically. And then if you got power less than, I think, about 6 hours a day, you basically paid nothing, essentially. You know, if you're from the poorest rural communities that don't have access to regular power, then you're not burdened with high tariff rates. So they created the different bands and categories of classes of tariffs. And this is the right approach. The approach is, over time, discos now have an incentive to make sure that the parts of the classes of their customers that pay the most got constant power. What now happens is that when they got constant power, the discos are flushed, and the liquidity is now in the system for them to extend the distribution network to the areas where they don't have regular power because of weak infrastructure. And then over time, when the tide rise, all boats get lifted. So what we were doing before, we were descending to the lowest common denominator. Now with this new strategy, everybody will try to rise to the best level of.
All right, now given that, yeah, we are making some progress,
Yes.
you know, even though may not be commensurable to what we desire, you know, as Nigerians. We are also understanding that we generate more than we actually eventually consume.
Correct.
Maybe because of infrastructure, from the distribution angle of things. You know, much more is generated, but when it comes to, you know, the final consumer getting it, who is supposed to, you know, be responsible for making sure that as much as is generated is also consumed at the same time?
Yeah, so there's an engineering part of my brain that says, okay, you don't consume everything you generate. I mean, it's just there's a part of it you have to have what they call spinning power. So I won't get into the details of that. You will never consume 100% of your generation. But you should try as much as possible to consume up to 80-90%. Yes, 80-90%. You must have your spinning power in case there's a downfall. There's all the redundancy and all that. So there's an engineering part of my brain there. But let me now speak to the common man. There's also the other part of this that we also have to understand is that we are sort of creating, because of all the adjustments in the system, is why you are having this new problem of, oh, you're not consuming as much as you're generating. Once upon a time, we never just generated enough, right? Or we even generated, or the generation power stations were not working. So some things have been done that had allowed our generation to now step up, but our distribution is not keeping up with it. So what we need to now do is to now reinforce the distribution side, and which was the reason why the president launched about 2 years ago the power project, the Siemens Power Project. The idea around the Siemens Power Project is to reinforce the distribution network across the country, invest in those distribution network. Just 2 weeks ago, the Federal Executive Council approved the first line of acquisition of substations across Nigeria by the FGN Power Company, which is a company invested in implementing the Siemens Power Project, which is focused on actually the distribution side of the network. Now, the other side of this also is to know that this is an extraordinary intervention by the federal government. It is not the responsibility. Under the new so-called industry rules and laws that created the new industry post-privatization, distribution was already privatized. Federal government owned, not even federal government, the government itself owns about aggregate of 40% of the, I would say about, because they also have some that they are still holding 100% for a period, but it's changing also, like Yola Disco. And they are old aggregate of about 40%. The private sector owns 60%. And so the responsibility, financially, technically, is with the private sector. But the federal government cannot sit aside and just watch the entire sector go down, because power sector is not just an utility, it's a strategic sector. There's a reason why when Boko Haram want to take out security in Maiduguri, they attack the power sector. So the power sector is strategic. No country will just say its power sector is 100% privatized, which is why it's very different from telecom, right? So what federal government has done is to do this extraordinary intervention to help strengthen the distribution network so that we can start evacuating more powers to those people that need it. But it doesn't mean that everybody still do not have a role to play. The distribution sector, the distribution companies also have an obligation under the terms of their investment to go and raise capital, to invest in their distribution network. Sitting down and saying and throwing your hands in the air and say, oh, if you don't do anything about it, well, you're the one that's wasting power. Well, the generation company are going. Well, I think the federal government also, the policymakers, the regulators also have a role to play. NERC, I think, made a rule earlier this year to say that you can actually evacuate power directly to immediate surrounding or contiguous area if you're a power generation company. So that way you're not dependent on a weak distribution infrastructure and having to evacuate into the transmission network and then compelled to waste your own power. So if you find an eligible customer, it's called the eligible customer rule, where you can actually find an eligible customer close to you, a cement factory, a bottling factory, a manufacturer, and you can sell power directly to them. Again, these are measures that can be taken in the short term. In the long run, I think what you need to do is to relook into the whole configuration of this privatization program, and if necessary, for some form of consolidation. I think we need to look at what we did in the banking sector, where they were forced to consolidate at some point. We need to look at how do we consolidate the Gencos and the Discos. Maybe we need to have some kind of rule issued by NARC, require some kind of recapitalization, which will then force maybe listing on the stock exchange so that these guys can actually increase liquidity to invest in the sector.
Okay. Now, in your assessment, would you say the privatization of the power sector was the right move, you know, that Nigeria actually made?
Privatization as a concept is fine. How you go about it is more important. I think the way they went about it, because it was also the lead up to the last major election, 2015, was done almost like a settlement for the boys. I mean, there's hardly anybody in the sector that doesn't feel this way. There were no participation by internationally renowned energy companies in that process. We didn't have any major investment by big international electricity provider, and there was a reason why. Because they looked at that process and said that process didn't make sense from pure financial return perspective, and they've been correct. And secondly is that the way the entire industry was divided was not practical. For this level of development of Nigeria, you coming out with multiple distribution companies, disjointed from multiple generation companies, and then you have a single TCN that, you know, pushes power between these two disaggregated entities. And then you have another temporary body, embeds, that is supposed to be doing settlement. What's not practical? And then anybody that understood power sector at the international level, and I've seen this being done either in India, in Brazil, in South Africa, even in the US, will tell you that that was not going to work. And that was what we got. So the process was bungled, no doubt. This administration was left with a very, very bad outcome to deal with. And so when I see people jumping on them to say, oh, you've not done this, the reality is that they were not the one that bungled it. And the reality also is that if they try to unbundle it by saying, bring back the license, the same people will go on TV and start shouting, oh, investors, you're chasing investors away. Oh, you're destroying investors. Anyways. Exactly. So you're caught between the devil and the
someone has to take the tough decision.
Yeah.
And the unpopular decision.
Of course.
No matter what, no matter who's going to be, brushed,
Sure.
for that. Yeah. So, which is why the current administration is, voted into office in the first place. So let's talk about, how much of effort that they are making in terms of unbundling this and changing, some of these arrangements.
Yeah, so we saw the recent regulatory action. They sort of tried to parry over it. That was done in Abuja Disco here. I mean, it was necessary. It was long overdue. And that's what we've been saying. Like, some of these guys that participated in this process were not necessarily the right guys to sell this sector, these assets to. And you needed to come in and step in to change this conversation at some point. Now, in the case of Abuja Disco, it was long overdue. They basically even led at some point to loss of complete power to the city, the capital city, which is strategic, which is security implication for that. And so it made no sense why they wouldn't come in to change and remove the bad actors in terms of the owners of that Abuja Disco. I think that was well done. The other two things I've mentioned before in terms of the restructuring of the payments, in terms of the tariff, service-based tariffs, commendable. Those things increase liquidity into the sector, in addition to the metering program, which phase 0 has now been done, and they're now implementing phase 0. Very commendable, because those are the things that you need to do to ensure investment into the sector if you're going to go on a privatization scheme. Last but not least, I think the most important thing this administration is actually doing is in the area of power access, especially to the rural poor. When you look at what is being done through the REA, or what is being done through what they call the COVID intervention, the ESP intervention under the COVID committee, it is very important that we get renewable power to the rural communities that might not even be able to access the fancy grid power you and I are discussing here today. How do we make sure that rural communities in Nigeria get 12, 18 hours of electricity so that their night economy can come back again, so that they can be able to have a prolonged increased GDP, so that they can be able to improve their farm produce, process it, so that they can be able to store food products so that it stops going to wastage. Those things to me are even more important than whether we spend $12 billion on cement or we spend $10 billion. We call all this massive amount of money. The reality is that with just less than 1% of that amount, you can transform rural communities across Nigeria. People still don't understand. Grid power in Nigeria gets to maybe 40, 45% of the communities, and maybe only 33% of them actually get some grid power in a month. So we still have 2/3 of the country in virtual darkness. So when we are having this debate around grid power, whether you have constant electricity, it's an elitist discussion among city people. So my thing is, how do we get renewable energy power to our rural communities where the action is? This is where young boys live. I mean, your previous segment was around security. It's about people being engaged, people being meaningfully engaged in economic activities. And if you as a farmer...
Which is where I'm going, next with my question. That power for industries, power for companies that will employ people. I mean, we've heard about the stories of how in the past, we've had textile companies, say in Kaduna, for instance, that usually will employ thousands of people and all of that. But most of them have had to go under because of the issues of power, one of them.
Yes, one of the issues.
How can we make an arrangement for industries in such a way that Nigeria can be able to produce more? Manufacturers can even be able to compete better, with their counterparts coming from other countries. How can we do that?
Two things. One is that we need to really look into the entire architecture of power in Nigeria. The current architecture is not working. I mean, again, the definition of madness is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. You cannot expect, the simple physics of power production. I produce power here, and then I'm going to evacuate that power into an imaginary grid that is controlled somewhere in the Shogbo, by the way, which is the National Control Center. And then they will now dispatch it. So before you do, the entire physics of power losses, when it goes into the power line and all that, we should understand that at the end of the day, it's better if that power should be dispatched to areas near where it is being produced. And there's no part of Nigeria that cannot produce a lot of power. The entire northwest and north central zone today is probably the power beast of Nigeria. When you look at the Niger state, which is producing a bunch of the Kaduna, all of the Gurara. I mean, there's no part of Nigeria that cannot produce own power. Hydro, solar, and gas. If you look at Nigeria, it's a country that is rich in any of these three sources of power. So the idea is, how do we increase the production and dispatch within each of these geographical catchment zones? The current strategy of saying, oh, everybody produce your power in your different area, you produce power all the way out in Kwale, in Delta State, and then you dispatch it into this imaginary grid, and you've lost about 20–30%.
Exactly.
When it's been moved to this imaginary grid, then dispatched again, then you have another distribution loss. We are wasting. We have adopted a culture.
If you look at
waste.
the AEDC, for instance, that distributes power to several other states, as far as Edo State. So
when you have Geregu next door here in Kogi State, and it can just adopt AEDC can just have Geregu at its own Genco and increase the capacity of power in Geregu. AKK pipeline is now being constructed.
So what would that take? Would it take some kind of infrastructural, maybe fresh, construction of structures, to do that?
It just takes us reimagining our sector. A lot of this thing is not so much. It's about someone saying, you know what you are doing right now is madness. You just really need to not stop doing what you're doing. I mean, it is currently, and let me tell you, it's simple, not legislative now, regulatory action like what Professor Soludo did with CBN, done by NERC. And I keep telling people that the missing piece in all of this action is the NERC. We need imaginative regulation. If you have imaginative regulation, a simple regulatory order from NERC requiring consolidation of Gencos and Discos. Every Disco must have a Genco. Just imagine, and all of you must now be capitalized by $5 billion overnight. If you like, go to the stock exchange. I give you 3 months, I take over the company.
So we are losing an oversight function here.
That's what Soludo did. Soludo basically said, oh, every bank must be worth this amount in 1 year. If you are not worth this amount, you no longer exist. All of them went looking for capital. And what happened? We have 25 big banks. Yeah, so it's a regulatory action. You just need regulatory action here. You need creative regulatory action.
What is stopping this from happening? Is it the politics around the power sector?
You have, I mean, for 20–25 years, you had mushroom banks. Before you had the Professor Soludo. And Professor Soludo basically said, I will do it. And everybody told him, go to hell, you can't do it. And he said, I will do it. And he did it. And you need, listen, again, everybody keeps saying, oh, president, everybody says, governor. I keep telling people, whatever job you're given, do it well. You are given chairman of NERC. This is an imagine. You've seen what CBN did with banks. They are the same thing. Banks, utility companies, they are all regulated sector. And the ultimate player in the regulated sector is the regulator. And the regulator gets whatever he wants. If you have sat down and we have looked at this sector and said, it doesn't make sense the way you have disaggregated production to distribution, I can write a rule. After doing the required consultation to make sure that they don't take me to court, there's a process that regulators go through. You do your town hall, you go through the process 6–9 months, and you come out and say, look, new rule. Everybody that is a Genco must have a Disco. Every Disco must have a Genco. And all of you must be worth $3 billion. Meaning that you have to go and raise money from the capital markets. And meaning that then you have money and cash to invest in your infrastructure. Again, these things are no-brainer. It's just we have to be creative.
Well, very, very strong point there, because I mean that's a major issue. Because each time you talk about, if you talk to economic experts, about manufacturing and production in Nigeria and why Nigeria is not exporting enough, one of the issues that they are going to raise is the issue of power.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. I mean, I keep telling people it's unfortunate because if you think about it, Nigeria is a gas country. We have more gas than oil, and almost 80% of our land surface has gas on that. I mean, as far as Bauchi, as northern as Niger State, there's gas everywhere in Nigeria. So there's no scarcity of gas in Nigeria, number one. Let's talk about that. People talk,
why is it expensive? Why is
well, there's a whole different situation around the supply chain. I know you talk about LPG and LNG, but the reality is that we're a gas country. We are wasting, if you fly from Ghana all the way to Kigali, so you pass, that plane will take you across the coast of Nigeria. you will see how we are flaring gas. We are the number one gas flarer in the world. We are burning our own gas.
And we have
That
so
gas
much
should be
concentration
used
of oil.
Gas. And again, I'm just talking about the Niger Delta now. I'm saying all over the country, unexplored gas regions across the country. But that's one. Two, Nigeria is an hydrological paradise. Our country is named after a river. Everywhere in Nigeria is a river. We have about 267 dams. Health, small, big, massive. Each of these dams can produce anything from 2 megawatts to 3,000, 4,000, like Kashimbila and the new. So there's dams everywhere.
Yeah,
and then thirdly, there's sunlight, abundant. I mean, we all feel heat. You and I are here, we'll be sweating in 5 minutes. Every roof in Nigeria is a potential power station.
True.
So there's no scarcity of power in Nigeria.
At all, but we still do not have it.
Because we've not organized ourselves.
Exactly. So, you know, recently the NERC also said something that got a lot of us thinking, that some neighboring countries that Nigeria supply electricity to, Benin, Nigeria, and the rest of them, do not actually pay, that they don't pay for the power. Yeah. And yet here we are, we need the power, and we do not have it, you know, in supply and all of that. What exactly is happening between Nigeria and its neighbors when it comes to providing power? Why do we have to provide power for anybody?
For free.
Okay, so, yeah, well, we are not providing it for free. There's a whole part of this, what we call it power diplomacy. It's a whole concept in power, in the power sector that you have to. It's complex, and complicated. Number one, you have to remember that we are at the downstream of most of our rivers, so we are the last to get the water, be it River Niger, or even it comes in from surrounding countries. And if we don't provide them power, then they are incentivized to dam the river upstream, which will mean that we will now have reduced water downstream to produce power for ourselves, as well as water for our farming, irrigation, and the rest of it. So there's what we call power diplomacy, where you, the big boy, who has the capacity to actually build a dam, you build a dam and then you provide some power to keep them from damming upstream and then reducing your own water. Because again, you have the population, 200 million people, they don't. Most of them are lightly populated countries. And you also have the need when it comes to, you have more power on grid than they are. So there's an incentive for you than them to build a dam and to give the power. But there's also an incentive in them owing you money. So if Togo and Benin Republic or Niger owes us money, for example, we can use it over them when it comes to voting for us at United Nations or African Development Bank. And, you know, there's there's a whole area of power diplomacy. So that we have to, again, you're a big boy, you're a giant of Africa, you have to act it. There's some price to pay.
Act it, really?
Yes.
We are acting because we are not. Are we really this giant?
No, the part of it that we have to say is that there's two parts to it. That's the supply side of the power diplomacy. There's the demand side of it. We are not playing the demand side politics very well. What do I mean? Because they are owing you also means that you have access to their market. I can say, no problem, don't pay me back. All I want is a Nigerian power company, MBN or one of the NBET, to get your 2/3 of your power license. So I don't want the money. Give me access to your market. And then you basically increase the amount of electricity you produce and you sell through your own company and you get your money back. And then if the country misbehaves, you can switch off the power. Again, they are all areas of, again, we are playing one side well, we are not playing the other side well. Right. So again, your power can be used for different. Look, Cameroon next to us to the east has massive demand for electricity. They have massive deficits in electricity as we speak right now. And they have a very unstable government. And if that government collapses, there's likely influx of about 5 to 10 million people into Nigeria. So we should be watching our backside. I mean, we have issues with our own problems already, but you have 20 million people in a likely unstable country to the eastern flank of Nigeria. But we have an opportunity to go in there to also say, Mr. Cameroon, if you produce more power, you're going to have more for your people. And we have 2 power stations, Calabar IPP, sitting down there that is spinning out, that is not distributing this issue of utilization. But we're watching it spin out for the last 3 to 4 years. We could easily have said, take some of that 400, 500, 600 megawatt that's spinning out that nobody's taking, and let's take it to Cameroon. And yes, instead of it spinning out, somebody's owing you for it. They might not eventually pay you for it, but at least you can use them owing you for the purposes. Yeah. So these are things that we should be doing. Yeah.
Oh, Well, it makes sense, really.
Yeah,
I mean, where you say that, because I really, for the life of me, could not understand
why we're giving power for free.
You know, NERC will be saying that these neighbors, they're not.
It's complicated.
It's free.
For the power, yet we need it and all of that.
Yes.
But again, doesn't mean they shouldn't pay. They should.
They should pay. They should pay. And we leverage it over them. It's not for any. I mean, only Nigeria. You guys are the. You have OPEC Secretary General, AFDB President, AFREXIM President. You have WTO Chairman. I mean, you are the only country in Africa that has everything. So there's a reason you always use this unpaid power to get votes. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, very interesting point there. I think we would end the discussion here and take a look at all the issues. Thank you so much for coming.
It's my pleasure.
On the program. We look forward to having you again.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Yes.